The lights of the mathematics department at Harvard University always burned late into the night, but on this particular evening in November, they would remain on until dawn, illuminating a moment that would challenge everything the academic world thought it knew about who can solve the unsolvable. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 11:47 p.m., Professor William Harrington rubbed his tired eyes and placed his chalk down in defeat. The Rothwell conjecture had claimed another victim. For 6 years, this mathematical problem had tormented the brightest minds at Harvard and beyond. A deceptively simple-looking equation about prime number distributions that, when solved, promised to revolutionize modern cryptography and potentially unlock new dimensions in quantum computing. But what happened next would send ripples through the academic community that persist to this day. The solution wouldn't come from a Fields Medal winner or a PhD prodigy with perfect SAT scores. It would come from a woman who had never set foot in the university lecture hall, who balanced checkbooks instead of equations, who saw numbers not as abstract concepts but as the rhythm of everyday life. This is the story of Maria Cortez, a taxi driver's wife from Dorchester, whose mind somehow perceived mathematical patterns that everyone else had missed. A woman who would prove that sometimes the greatest insights come not from those who've mastered the rules, but from those who never learned them in the first place. The rain fell in sheets across Boston, transforming the city into a blur of neon reflections and hydroplaning taxis. Inside one of those taxis, Hector Cortez navigated the slick streets with the expertise of a man who had been driving these roads for 27 years. "Professor, you forgot your bag," Hector called out as his passenger, distracted and mumbling equations under his breath, nearly left his leather satchel in the back seat. The tall, slender man with unkempt grey hair turned back, his face momentarily illuminated by the cab's interior light. "Thank you. My mind is elsewhere tonight," Professor Richard Montgomery said with a tired smile, retrieving his bag. "The department would have my head if I lost these papers." "Important stuff?" Hector asked, always one for friendly conversation, especially with the regulars. Montgomery hesitated, then shrugged. "Just the unsolvable riddle that's destroying my academic reputation and the sleep schedules of everyone in the mathematics department." Hector laughed. "My wife loves riddles. Can't keep her away from those Sudoku puzzles in the Sunday paper. Always finishes them before her coffee gets cold." The professor nodded absently, rain dripping from his coat as he stood half in, half out of the taxi. Then perhaps from exhaustion or a momentary lapse in professional judgment, he pulled a crumpled photocopy from his bag. "Here's our white whale, Mr. Cortez. The Rothwell conjecture. Maybe your wife can solve it over breakfast," he joked, handing over the paper. "The entire department's been stuck on it for years." Hector accepted the paper with a chuckle, placing it on the passenger seat as Montgomery paid his fare and disappeared into the imposing stone building of Harvard's mathematics department. The taxi driver thought nothing more of it as he continued his shift, picking up drunk students and weary hospital staff as the night wore on. At 3:14 a.m., Hector Cortez finally returned to the modest two-bedroom apartment in Dorchester that he shared with his wife Maria and their teenage daughter Sophia. The apartment was quiet, except for the soft scratching sound coming from the kitchen table. Maria Cortez sat hunched over a notebook. The crumpled photocopy Professor Montgomery had given Hector now smoothed out beside her. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, reading glasses perched on her nose. She didn't look up when Hector entered. "Maria, it's after 3. What are you doing still up?" She didn't respond immediately, her pencil making swift, decisive marks on the paper. Hector recognized the expression on his wife's face. The same. one she wore when balancing their household accounts to the penny or planning the most efficient routes for his taxi shifts. "This problem," she finally said, her accent still present despite 23 years in Boston. "It has a beautiful rhythm to it, but something is missing." Hector sighed, hanging up his rain-soaked jacket. "That's just some impossible math. In thing from a Harvard professor. He was joking when he gave it to me." Maria finally looked up, her dark eyes bright with an intensity that surprised him. "It's not impossible, it's just incomplete, like music with missing notes." Hector knew better than to argue with his wife when she had that look. Maria had always possessed an uncanny ability with numbers, managing their finances with precision that their bank would envy, calculating complex percentages in her head faster than digital tip calculators. Though she had only completed high school in her native Dominican Republic before coming to America, numbers had always spoken to her in a language more familiar than English. "Come to bed, mi amor." The professor said the smartest people at Harvard have been stuck on this for years. But Maria shook her head. "Just a little longer. I feel something here." Hector kissed the top of her head and went to bed alone, falling asleep to the continued scratching of his wife's pencil from the kitchen. When he woke at noon, his shift didn't start until 3. Maria was still at the table, surrounded now by dozens of pages filled with calculations, numbers, and strange diagrams that looked less like mathematics and more like the patterns Maria embroidered on their curtains. "Have you been up all night?" he asked, concerned. Maria nodded distractedly. "The numbers. They make a pattern, but not the way they're teaching it." Sophia emerged from her bedroom, her school uniform already on, despite it being Saturday. The 16-year-old had inherited her mother's practicality, along with her affinity for mathematics. "Mom, did you forget? My Saturday prep class starts in an hour." Maria looked up, momentarily disoriented. "Of course, Mika, let me just—" "I'll take her," Hector said quickly. "You should get some sleep." But Maria was already gathering her papers. "No, I'll come too. I need to use the library." "The library?" Hector and Sophia exchanged confused glances. "I need to check something," Maria said, sliding the papers into Sophia's geometry textbook. "The public library won't have what I need." That afternoon, while Sophia attended her SAT prep course at a community center near Harvard Square, Maria Cortez, dressed in her sensible work clothes, her hair neatly braided, walked through the imposing entrance of the Granoff Science Library at Harvard University. She moved with a purposeful confidence that belied her racing heart. The security guard barely glanced at her as she entered. Just another cleaning staff member or campus employee, he assumed. Maria had counted on that assumption, had dressed the part deliberately. Invisibility had its advantages. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Inside, the library was a cathedral of knowledge that both intimidated and thrilled her. Massive bookshelves stretched toward ornate ceilings, and quiet study areas were populated with students hunched over laptops and textbooks. Maria felt a pang of regret for the education she'd never had, followed by determination for her daughter Sophia, who would have every opportunity Maria had missed. She found the mathematics section with ease, as if drawn there by some invisible current. Her fingers traced the spines of advanced textbooks, stopping at titles that somehow called to her. She couldn't understand the complex terminology, but certain equations leaped out from the pages like familiar faces in a crowd. For 2 hours, Maria sat cross-legged on the floor in a secluded corner of the library, surrounded by open books. She didn't read them conventionally. She flipped through pages until an equation caught her eye, then studied it intensely before moving on. It was like listening for specific notes in a symphony. At one point, a young graduate student with neatly trimmed beard and plastic-framed glasses paused nearby, watching her with curiosity. "Are you looking for something specific?" he asked, his tone suggesting that she might be lost. Maria hesitated, then pulled the crumpled photocopy from her bag. "This problem. I'm trying to understand why everyone thinks it's unsolvable." The student's eyes widened as he recognized the infamous Rothwell conjecture. He looked at Maria with new interest, perhaps wondering if she was a visiting professor from another university. "That's Professor Montgomery's current obsession," he said. "He's been working on it for years. The whole department has. Are you with the Applied Mathematics Conference?" Maria shook her head. "No, I'm just interested in patterns." The student, who introduced himself as Nathan Porter, sat down beside her. "I've been helping Montgomery with some of the computational models. It's fascinating stuff, but we keep hitting dead ends. The traditional approaches all lead to contradictions." For the next hour, Nathan explained the background of the Rothwell conjecture to Maria. He was surprised by her insightful questions, though some were phrased in unconventional ways that made him pause. She didn't use standard mathematical terminology, but her understanding seemed to run deep nonetheless. "You know," Nathan said finally, "you have an interesting way of looking at this. Most people try to attack it with standard analytical methods, but you're talking about it almost like it's music or architecture." Maria smiled. "Numbers have shapes and rhythms. When my daughter was learning multiplication tables, I taught her to feel the patterns, not just memorize them." Nathan looked at her thoughtfully. "There's a seminar on computational approaches to the conjecture tomorrow evening. It's technically for department members, but I could sign you in as my guest. If you're interested." Maria hesitated, then nodded. "What time?" The next day, Sunday, Maria told Hector she was attending a community college information session. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had been considering taking accounting courses. But instead of the community college, she found herself outside Stein Hall at 7 p.m., nervously smoothing her one good blazer borrowed from a neighbor. Nathan met her at the entrance as promised, eyebrows raised slightly at her formal attire. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, guiding her through security. "I wasn't sure either," Maria admitted. The lecture hall was intimidating. Tiered seating, massive digital displays, and about 40 people who radiated intelligence and privilege in equal measure. Maria took a seat in the back row, trying to make herself invisible once again. Professor Montgomery himself was presenting, looking more polished than he had in Hector's taxi. He spoke with authority about computational methods and algorithmic approaches, occasionally writing equations on the digital board that automatically saved his work to the department's servers. Maria watched intently, her notebook open on her, a lap, but she wasn't taking conventional notes. Instead, she was sketching what looked like a spiraling pattern, numbers flowing along curved lines rather than in strict columns. Halfway through the presentation, Montgomery displayed a particularly complex equation and sighed. "And this is where we consistently hit the wall. The distribution pattern breaks down when we extend beyond this point." Maria's pencil froze. She stared at the equation, then at her spiral drawing. Something clicked, not in her mind, but deeper, in that place where she had always understood numbers as physical entities with shape and weight and rhythm. Without thinking, she raised her hand. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to the back row, to this unknown woman who dared to interrupt. Montgomery peered over his glasses. "Yes? Do you have a question?" Maria's throat went dry. She hadn't meant to draw attention to herself, but it was too late now. "It's not breaking down," she said, her accent suddenly seeming very prominent. "In the quiet room, the pattern doesn't stop, it changes direction." Montgomery frowned. "I'm sorry, Ms. Cortez, Maria Cortez." Ms. Cortez, this pattern has been verified through multiple computational models. It definitively breaks down at this point. Maria stood up, clutching her notebook. Only if you think of it as a linear sequence. But what if it's not a line, but a spiral? A murmur rippled through the audience. Nathan looked both mortified and fascinated. Montgomery's frown deepened. Are you suggesting a cyclical pattern? That's been thoroughly explored and disproven. Not cyclical, Maria said, moving toward the front of the room, as if drawn by an invisible force. Spiral. Like the way water drains or the way certain plants grow. The numbers don't continue straight, they curve. She reached the board, aware of the stares but suddenly too engrossed in the problem to care. May I? She asked, gesturing to the digital. Stylus. Montgomery hesitated, then handed it to her with the bemused expression of someone humoring an eccentric. Maria began to draw. Not equations at first, but a spiral pattern, then numbers along its curve. Then, finally, equations, but arranged in a way no one in the room had seen before. They followed the spiral, creating relationships between values that weren't apparent in linear notation. If you arrange them this way, she explained, her hand moving with increasing confidence, you can see that when the pattern seems to break, it's actually just turning a corner. The room was dead silent. Montgomery stared at the board, his expression shifting from skepticism to confusion to dawning amazement. That's... he began, then stopped, recalculating in his head. That's not possible. Unless... He grabbed another stylus and began working alongside her, following her spiral but adding standard notation. For 10 minutes, they worked in tandem, the audience watching in stunned silence as this unlikely collaboration unfolded. Finally, Montgomery stepped back, his face pale. It bridges the contradiction, he whispered. By restructuring the dimensional framework, it allows the pattern to continue without breaking down. He turned to Maria. How did you see this? This approach isn't in any of the literature. Maria shrugged, suddenly self-conscious again. I just see numbers differently, always have. Who are you? Montgomery asked, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier condescension. Are you with another university? Maria looked down at her sensible shoes. I balance books for small businesses. My husband drives a taxi. The silence in the room deepened. Someone in the third row actually gasped. Montgomery looked from Maria to the board and back again. Your husband. A taxi driver named Cortez. Picked me up Friday night. Recognition dawned on his face. I gave him a copy of the conjecture as a joke. Maria nodded. He brought it home. I couldn't sleep until I understood it. Nathan stepped forward. Professor, she was in the library yesterday, studying the foundations of the problem. I thought she was a visiting academic. Montgomery stared at the spiral pattern on the board, then back at Maria. Ms. Cortez, this approach is revolutionary. It completely reframes the problem in a way no one has considered. He gestured to the audience. We've had the best mathematical minds working on this for years. How did you see something we all missed? Maria considered the question carefully. When I was a girl in Santo Domingo, my grandmother taught me to weave baskets. She showed me how patterns work, how they follow the shape of the thing being made. I think maybe mathematics is not so different from weaving. The pattern must follow the true shape of the problem. Montgomery nodded slowly, a smile spreading across his face. Miss Cortez, would you be willing to continue this discussion? This could be the breakthrough we've been looking for. As the implications of what had just happened began to sink in around the room, Maria thought of her daughter Sophia, of the opportunities that had always seemed just out of reach. I would like that very much, Professor, she said, but I know very little of formal mathematics. Montgomery laughed, a genuine sound of delight that echoed in the stunned lecture hall. "Miss Cortez, I think you may understand mathematics better than anyone in this room. We've just been speaking the wrong language." Later that night, as Maria finally returned home to find Hector waiting up for her, concern etched on his face, she placed her notebook on their kitchen table, the same table where she balanced their budget and helped Sophia with her homework. "Where have you been?" Hector asked. "I called the community college. There was no information session tonight." Maria took a deep breath. "Remember that math problem? The impossible one from your Harvard professor?" Hector nodded, confused. "It's not impossible anymore," she said simply. And as she explained what had happened in that lecture hall, how the respected Harvard professor had looked at her work with growing amazement, how he had invited her to collaborate on a formal paper, how he had spoken of research grants and revolutionary approaches, Hector's expression transformed from confusion to disbelief to bursting pride. "The taxi driver's wife," he whispered, shaking his head in wonder. "Solving what Harvard couldn't solve." Maria smiled, thinking of all the numbers that had danced in her head throughout her life, the patterns she had always seen but never known how to share. "It's just the beginning," she said, taking her husband's hand. "There are so many more patterns waiting to be found." Then, outside their apartment window, the lights of Boston twinkled like stars, the city unaware that its mathematical landscape had just been irreversibly altered by a woman who had never stopped seeing the world through the eyes of a basket weaver's granddaughter. The morning after Maria's breakthrough at the seminar, Professor Montgomery couldn't sleep. He sat in his book-lined office at 5:30 a.m., staring at the digital capture of Maria's spiral notation. The elegant simplicity of it haunted him. How had they all missed this approach? The pattern seemed so obvious now, a dimensional shift that allowed the numbers to flow naturally instead of forcing them into linear constraints. His colleagues would need convincing. The academic world didn't easily accept outsiders, especially ones without credentials. Montgomery had already received 3 emails from senior faculty who had heard about the incident at last night's seminar. Words like disruption and protocol featured prominently, no mention of the mathematical breakthrough. Montgomery sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. In his 32 years at Harvard, he had witnessed brilliance in many forms. Prodigies who had been programming since age 4, international students with perfect scores on every exam, faculty who could solve complex equations while carrying on unrelated conversations. But he had never seen anything quite like Maria Cortez's intuitive grasp of multidimensional patterns. At precisely 8 a.m., a knock came at his door. Maria stood there looking more nervous than she had during her impromptu presentation. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a worn leather portfolio that belonged to her daughter. "You asked me to come early," she said, her voice uncertain, "before the others arrive." Montgomery smiled, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Cortez. I wanted to speak privately about how to proceed." Maria sat down, hands folded in her lap. "My husband thinks I should ask for payment for solving the problem." Her directness was refreshing after years of academic politics. "That's certainly reasonable," Montgomery said, "though I should clarify that we haven't fully solved the Rothwell conjecture yet. Your approach has given us a breakthrough path, but there's still work to be done to formalize it into a complete proof." "I understand," Maria nodded. "Numbers are like rivers. I showed you where the river goes, but we must still map its course." Montgomery leaned forward, fascinated by her metaphors. "Exactly, and I'd like you to be part of that mapping process, if you're willing." He slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a university contract offering Maria a 6-month position as a research consultant to the mathematics department. The stipend was modest by academic standards, but more than Maria earned in a year at her part-time bookkeeping jobs. This would give you official standing within the university and compensation for your time, Montgomery explained. I've also arranged for library access and computing resources. Maria's eyes widened as she read the document. This is very generous, Professor. It's less than your insight is worth, Montgomery said honestly. But it's a start. There will also be academic credit when we publish, which could lead to more opportunities. Maria ran her fingers over the embossed Harvard logo on the contract. I never finished college, she admitted. I came to America when I was 19, had Sophia by 21. Maria, Montgomery said gently, using her first name for the first time. Formal education and mathematical insight are not always correlated. I've had PhD students who couldn't see what you showed us yesterday. She nodded slowly. I need to discuss with Hector, and I would need flexibility. Sophia has college applications this year. I cannot miss helping her. Of course, Montgomery. Agreed. We can work around your schedule. The important thing is your perspective, your approach. He searched for the right word. Transformative. Maria carefully placed the contract in her portfolio. There is something else, she said. I would like to understand the mathematics better, the proper terms, the history. Montgomery smiled. I think we can arrange some tutorials, though I suspect you already understand more than you realize, just in a different language. By noon, news of Maria's contract had spread throughout the department. Nathan Porter found her in the mathematics library, surrounded by introductory textbooks. So you're officially joining us, he said, sitting down across from her. That's fantastic. Maria looked up, her expression serious. I'm trying to catch up. There is so much I don't know. Nathan gestured to the pile of undergraduate texts. This isn't the best approach. These are written for students who think conventionally. You don't. He pulled out his tablet and opened a drawing application. Show me how you see the Rothwell problem again, but don't try to use standard notation. Draw it the way it makes sense to you. For the next hour, Maria sketched her understanding of mathematical relationships, while Nathan recorded and occasionally translated into formal notation. Other graduate students drifted over, drawn by curiosity. Soon a small crowd had gathered, watching as Maria mapped mathematical concepts into visual patterns that looked more like art than equations. It's like she's creating a new mathematical language, one doctoral candidate whispered, or rediscovering a very old one, another replied. By the end of the week, Maria had become something of a phenomenon within the department. Montgomery had arranged for her to have a small workspace in the corner of his lab. Nothing fancy, just a desk and computer, but it quickly became a pilgrimage site for students stuck on difficult problems. Show me how you would approach this, they would ask, presenting equations that had frustrated them for weeks. Maria would study their work, then begin sketching her spiral patterns, translating the linear mathematics into flowing visual forms. Sometimes she couldn't help directly. Certain types of abstract algebra didn't translate well to her visual framework. But often she would identify pattern breaks or alternative approaches that the students had overlooked. Professor Elaine Webster, chair of the Applied Mathematics Department, observed one of these sessions with thinly veiled skepticism. This is all very interesting, Richard, she said afterward in Montgomery's office. But it seems more like mathematical art therapy than rigorous analysis. Montgomery handed her a folder. These are the developments on the Rothwell conjecture from the past week. We've formalized Maria's approach into proper notation and verified the pattern extension through computational modeling. Webster flipped through the pages, her expression changing from dismissal to interest to astonishment. This can't be right. The distribution curve shouldn't be able to maintain coherence across these boundary conditions. It does if you allow for dimensional recursion, Montgomery said. Maria sees the pattern as a spiral, but mathematically, it's a recursively defined manifold with self-similar properties at key transitions. Webster closed the folder. You're saying this bookkeeper has discovered a new class of mathematical structures. I'm saying she sees mathematical relationships that our training blinds us to, Montgomery replied carefully. And yes, I believe this approach will lead to new mathematical frameworks with significant applications. The department needs more evidence before we commit additional resources, Webster said, but her tone had softened. I'll expect a formal presentation in 2 weeks. Later that day, Montgomery found Maria staring at her computer screen, frustrated. The software doesn't allow the functions to flow the right way, she explained. It forces everything into rows and columns. Montgomery considered this problem. What if we developed a tool that matches your way of thinking, something that allows for visual mathematical modeling? Maria's eyes lit up. Is that possible? With the right programmer? Yes, Montgomery said. Let me make some calls. 2 days later, Maria met Vivian Chen, a computer science graduate student specializing in mathematical visualization. Vivian had created tools for visualizing higher dimensional structures and was intrigued by Maria's approach. Show me exactly how you visualize these patterns, Vivian said, fingers poised over her keyboard. As Maria explained, Vivian began coding, occasionally stopping to clarify a concept or test a feature. By the end of the day, they had a crude prototype, a program that allowed Maria to draw mathematical relationships as flowing, interconnected patterns rather than static equations. It's like the difference between sheet music and actually hearing the song, Maria said, manipulating a complex pattern on the screen. Vivian nodded, watching as Maria intuitively navigated relationships that would have required complex calculations to express conventionally. You're not solving equations, she observed. You're feeling mathematical harmonies. The tool evolved rapidly over the next week, with Vivian adding features as Maria identified needs. They called it flow mathematics, though the graduate students had nicknamed it the Maria method. As the date for the department presentation approached, Maria grew increasingly anxious. She spent more time at home, balancing her Harvard work with helping Sophia complete college applications. The contrast between her worlds was jarring, moving from complex mathematical visualizations to checking essay word counts and calculating financial aid possibilities. One evening, Sophia found her mother staring at a printout of her spiral notation, making small adjustments with a pencil. "Mom, are you okay?" Sophia asked, sitting beside her at the kitchen table. "You've been so quiet lately." Maria smiled tiredly, just nervous about the presentation. These professors, they have studied mathematics their whole lives. What if they think I'm a fraud? Sophia took the pencil from her mother's hand. "Remember when you taught me fractions using pizza slices? And all the kids in my class were struggling with the textbook method?" Maria nodded. "My teacher told me I was doing it wrong, but I got every answer right," Sophia continued. "You told me then that there are many paths to the same truth, and the best path is the one that makes sense to you." Maria embraced her daughter, tears welling in her eyes. "When did you become so wise?" "I learned from the best," Sophia replied. "Besides, Mom, you literally solved a problem that Harvard geniuses couldn't figure out. They should be nervous presenting to you." The morning of the presentation, Hector insisted on driving Maria to campus himself, though it meant missing the profitable morning rush. He parked his taxi on a side street near the mathematics building, practically glowing with pride. "My brilliant wife," he said, straightening her collar. "Go show them how a real problem solver thinks." The presentation room was intimidating. a wood-paneled chamber with portraits of stern-faced mathematicians lining the walls. At the center was a large oval table surrounded by senior faculty, department chairs, and a few select graduate students, including Nathan and Vivian. Montgomery began with a formal introduction, explaining the history of the Rothwell conjecture and the department's previous approaches. He was deliberate in his framing, establishing the legitimacy of the problem before introducing Maria's contribution. "And now," he said after 20 minutes of context setting, "I'd like to introduce Maria Cortez, who has provided us with a revolutionary perspective on this challenge." Maria stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly as she connected her tablet to the room's display system. The familiar spiral patterns appeared on the large screen, now rendered in Vivian's specialized software with mathematical annotations, hovering alongside the visual flow. "I understand numbers as shapes and movements," Maria began, her accent more pronounced under stress. "When I first saw the Rothwell problem, I noticed the pattern was trying to turn but was being forced to stay straight." She manipulated the display, showing how conventional approaches attempted to extend the pattern linearly, creating the contradiction that had stumped researchers. "But if we allow it to follow its natural path," she continued, tracing a graceful spiral with her finger, "the pattern maintains coherence through what you call dimensional transitions." For the next 40 minutes, Maria walked the faculty through her approach, occasionally deferring to Montgomery for formal mathematical terminology, but never losing the thread of her explanation. She showed how her visualization method had already been applied to 3 other unsolved problems, revealing pattern relationships that weren't apparent in conventional notation. When she finished, there was a moment of profound silence. Then, Professor Webster spoke. "This approach lacks formal rigor," she said, but her tone was thoughtful rather than dismissive. "However, the pattern recognition is undeniable, and the computational verification is compelling." An older professor with wire-rimmed glasses leaned forward. "Ms. Cortez, your visualization method reminds me of techniques used in topological data analysis, but with an intuitive component that our algorithms haven't captured. Have you considered the applications to machine learning?" Maria glanced at Montgomery, who nodded encouragingly. "I've been focusing on the patterns themselves," she replied, "but yes, I believe this approach could help computers recognize dimensional transitions in complex data sets." The questions continued for another hour, growing increasingly technical, but also increasingly respectful. Maria answered what she could and acknowledged what she couldn't, never pretending to understand jargon, but never backing down from her core insights either. By the end, even the most skeptical faculty members were engaged, scribbling notes and requesting access to the visualization software. The atmosphere had shifted from evaluation to collaboration. As the meeting concluded, Webster approached Maria directly. "The department will extend your contract to a full year," she said, "and we'd like to expand the scope to include development of your visualization methodology for teaching purposes." Maria blinked in surprise. "Teaching?" "Your approach makes intuitive sense of concepts that many students struggle with," Webster explained. "We'd like to explore its potential as a pedagogical tool, particularly for students who don't respond well to traditional mathematical instruction." Later, in Montgomery's office, Maria finally let her composure slip. "I thought they would laugh at me," she admitted, her hands still shaking with residual nervousness. Montgomery shook his head. "Mathematicians care about results, Maria. Your approach works. That's what matters ultimately, not the path you took to get there or the credentials you hold." He handed her a business card. "This is Daniel Torres from MIT's mathematics department." He was at the presentation, sitting in the back corner. "He's interested in having you consult on a visual mathematics curriculum they're developing for neurodivergent students." Maria stared at the card. This is happening so fast. Paradigm shifts usually do, Montgomery said. Once people see a new way forward, they can't unsee it. That evening, Maria, Hector, and Sophia celebrated at their kitchen table with a special dinner. Sophia had made her mother's favorite arroz con gandules, while Hector splurged on a bottle of champagne, the first they'd bought since their 20th anniversary. To my wife, the mathematical revolutionary, Hector toasted, his face beaming with pride. Sophia raised her glass of sparkling cider. To Mom, who always told me that understanding doesn't always come from books. Maria looked at her family, overwhelmed with emotion. To both of you, for believing in me even when I didn't understand what I was seeing. After dinner, as Hector washed dishes and Sophia returned to her homework, Maria sat by their small apartment window, looking out. At the Boston skyline, the city looked different now. The lights forming patterns she'd never noticed before, spirals and flows, connections between seemingly separate points. She pulled out her notebook and began sketching. Not mathematical formulas this time, but a different kind of pattern, a life path that had seemed random, but now revealed its hidden coherence. From the girl who wove baskets in Santo Domingo to the woman who revealed mathematical harmonies at Harvard, there was a continuous flow, unbroken despite all appearances. Her phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. The visualization software's being installed lab-wide tomorrow. You've started something big, Maria smiled, adding another curve to her sketch. She had simply seen what was already there, waiting to be recognized. The next morning, Maria arrived at her small desk in Montgomery's lab to find a surprise. It had been moved to a more spacious corner office with windows overlooking the campus. A small nameplate on the door read, Maria Cortez, Mathematical, Visualization Specialist. The department authorized it yesterday, Montgomery explained, appearing behind her. They felt our consultant should have appropriate workspace. Maria ran her hand along the smooth surface of the new desk. I never imagined. Get used to it, Montgomery said with a smile. This is just the beginning. Within days, Maria's corner office became a bustling hub of activity. Graduate students dropped by with difficult problems. Faculty members scheduled consultations, and Vivian practically moved in, continually refining the visualization software based on Maria's feedback. The power dynamic was fascinating to observe. Distinguished professors with decades of experience would tentatively present their research to this woman, with no formal training, hoping she might see patterns they had missed. Maria remained humble, but increasingly confident, no longer apologizing for her unconventional methods. Show me how the variables interact, she would say, and then watch as complex equations were translated into her visualization framework. Often, she would point to specific regions in the pattern. There's tension here. The function wants to curve, but you're forcing it to remain linear. One afternoon, Dr. James Whitman, a physicist from the adjacent building, appeared in her doorway. He had heard about the pattern woman and brought a problem involving quantum field fluctuations that had stymied his team for months. Our equations break down at the boundary conditions, he explained, showing her the mathematical models. Maria studied them, then opened the visualization software. May I? For the next hour, she translated the physics problem into her flowing visual language. Whitman watched, initially skeptical, but gradually leaning forward with increasing interest. The relationship isn't breaking down, Maria finally said. It's changing dimensionality. See how the pattern compresses here, then expands again? It's like water flowing through a narrow channel. Whitman stared at the screen. That actually makes sense conceptually. The field would indeed experience dimensional compression at those energy levels. He shook his head in amazement. But our standard notation doesn't capture that transition gracefully. Mathematics is a language, Maria said simply. Sometimes we need different dialects to express different truths. News of Maria's insights spread beyond the mathematics department. Professors from computer science, economics, even music theory sought her perspective. Each field had problems where traditional analytical methods hit walls, places where patterns seemed to break down or contradictions emerged. Maria couldn't solve everything, but her approach revealed new pathways in surprising places. A music theorist discovered harmonic relationships by visualizing compositions as spiraling patterns. An economist found cyclic behaviors in market data by allowing his models to flow three-dimensionally rather than linearly. 6 weeks after her initial breakthrough, Maria was invited to give a presentation to the university's Board of Interdisciplinary Studies. This time, Montgomery sat in the audience while Maria commanded the stage, demonstrating her visualization methodology to a room of distinguished academics from across the university. She had grown more polished, but remained authentically herself, still occasionally searching for English words, still relating mathematical concepts to everyday experiences like cooking and weaving. But now she spoke with the confidence of someone who had repeatedly proven her value. Traditional mathematical notation evolved to serve particular types of thinking, she explained. But human cognition is diverse. My approach offers an alternative, and pathway for those who perceive patterns differently. After the presentation, the Dean of the School of Engineering approached her. Ms. Cortez, we're developing a new computational thinking curriculum for our first-year students. Would you consider leading a workshop on alternative problem-solving approaches? Maria hesitated only briefly before nodding. I would be honored. Later that week, Maria sat in on an undergraduate calculus class, not as a student, but as an observer, evaluating how her visualization method might complement traditional teaching. The professor had invited her after struggling to help several students who consistently failed to grasp fundamental concepts despite understanding the component parts. She watched from the back of the lecture hall as the professor explained derivatives, the students' faces reflecting varying degrees of comprehension and confusion. When the class broke into study groups, Maria approached a table where 3 students were clearly struggling. May I show you another way to think about this? She asked. For 20 minutes, she guided them through a visual approach to calculus, showing how derivatives could be understood as the breathing of mathematical curves, expanding and contracting, changing not just in value, but in character. I've been taking calculus 3 times, one student said afterward, and this is the first time it's made intuitive sense. Maria returned home that evening deep in thought. Hector was working a late shift, and Sophia was studying at a friend's house. The apartment was quiet, giving her space to process everything that had happened in the past 2 months. Her life had transformed so completely, it sometimes felt like a dream. From balancing small business accounts to consulting with Harvard. Physicists from worrying about making rent to helping shape new educational approaches. Yet through it all, she still felt like herself, a woman who simply saw the world through patterns. She picked up a framed photo from the side table. Herself at 19, newly arrived in Boston, standing anxiously beside a young Hector. Back then, she had struggled to help at his family's corner store, adding up purchases in her head faster than the ancient cash register could calculate them. Even then, numbers had spoken to her in their distinct language of shape and flow. Her phone rang, interrupting her reflections. It was Montgomery. Maria, he said without preamble, I've just received word from the Rothwell Committee. They've reviewed our formal proof incorporating your approach. It's been accepted. Maria sat down, suddenly lightheaded. Truly? Yes. The Rothwell conjecture is officially solved, with you as primary contributor. His voice was warm with genuine pleasure. There will be a formal announcement next week. After they hung up, Maria walked to the window, gazing out at the city lights again. Somewhere out there, Hector was driving his taxi, telling customers about his brilliant wife, as he always did. Sophia was building her future, applying to universities that now seemed within reach, not just financially, but rightfully, places where her mother was becoming known as a pioneer. Maria pressed her hand against the cool glass. The spiral patterns she'd always seen in numbers were reflected in her own life's trajectory, a path that curved unexpectedly, but maintained its essential integrity through every transition, from invisible to essential, from outsider to innovator. The next morning, Maria arrived at her office to find it filled with flowers, orchids from Montgomery, sunflowers from the graduate students, a colorful arrangement from the physics department. News of the Rothwell solution had spread overnight. Tucked among the bouquets was a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. Inside was a hand-carved wooden box containing intricately woven palm strips, forming a complex spiral pattern of wood. Note in elegant handwriting read, "To remind you of where patterns begin. Abuela would be proud. Love, Tia Elena." Maria touched the weaving gently, her vision blurring with tears. Her grandmother's basket patterns had traveled with her after, all transformed into a mathematical language that was changing how Harvard itself understood the world. The morning the Rothwell solution was formally announced, Maria woke before dawn. She stood in her small kitchen, coffee in hand, watching the early light paint the Boston skyline. In just 3 months, she had gone from anonymous bookkeeper to mathematical innovator, her name now permanently linked with one of the most significant mathematical breakthroughs of the decade. Her phone had been buzzing constantly since yesterday. Congratulatory messages from the mathematics department, interview requests from science publications, even an invitation to speak at an upcoming TED conference. The quiet life she had known was rapidly transforming into something unrecognizable. Hector appeared beside her, still in his pajamas, hair mussed from sleep. "Today's the big day," he said, slipping an arm around her waist. "How does it feel to be famous?" Maria leaned against him. "Strange, like I'm watching someone else's life. Are you having second thoughts?" There was genuine concern in his voice. "No," Maria said after a moment, "but everything is happening so fast. The university wants me to speak at a press conference. Today, Professor Montgomery says journalists from the New York Times and Washington Post will be there." "You'll be wonderful," Hector assured her. "Just speak from your heart, the way you always do." Maria nodded, though anxiety still churned in her stomach. It wasn't just the press conference. Yesterday, Montgomery had mentioned something about patent applications for the visualization software and potential corporate partnerships. Words like commercialization and intellectual property had been thrown around, concepts as foreign to Maria as quantum physics had been 3 months ago. The press conference was held in Stein Hall's Grand Auditorium, a venue usually reserved for Nobel laureates and distinguished visiting scholars. Maria sat at a long table on the stage, flanked by Montgomery and Professor Webster, while university officials and department heads filled the remaining seats. Before them, dozens of journalists with cameras and recording devices waited expectantly. The university president spoke first, praising the collaborative spirit that had led to the breakthrough. Montgomery followed with a technical explanation of the Rothwell conjecture and its significance. Then it was Maria's turn. She approached the podium, acutely aware of the contrast between herself and the distinguished academics surrounding her. She wore her best dress, a simple blue sheath that Sophia had helped her choose, but still felt underdressed among the tailored suits and academic regalia. 3 months ago, she began, her voice soft but steady, I was balancing books for a local grocery store and helping my daughter with her homework. I had never heard of the Rothwell conjecture. A ripple of amusement passed through the audience. My husband drives a taxi in this city. One rainy night, he picked up Professor Montgomery, who left a copy of this famous unsolved problem in the back seat. My husband brought it home as a curiosity. But when I saw it, I recognized something familiar. A pattern that wanted to flow in a specific way, but was being forced into straight lines. Maria paused, gathering her thoughts. I did not solve this problem because I'm a mathematical genius. I solved it because I see numbers differently, as shapes with natural movements, like rivers finding their paths. Where others saw equations breaking down, I saw them changing direction. As she spoke, images appeared on the screen behind her. Her spiral notation, now refined and elegantly rendered by the visualization software. My grandmother taught me to weave baskets when I was a girl in the Dominican Republic. She showed me how patterns must follow the true shape of the object being created. This is also true in mathematics. The patterns must follow the true shape of the problem. The room was silent now, captivated by her simple eloquence. I am grateful to Harvard University for recognizing that insights can come from unexpected places and for giving me the opportunity to contribute to a field I never formally studied. My hope is that this discovery opens doors not just for new mathematical approaches, but for new voices in all academic disciplines. The questions afterward came rapid fire. Most were predictable. Requests for simplified explanations of her method, inquiries about her background, questions about potential applications. Maria answered each one with growing confidence, occasionally deferring technical details to Montgomery, but never shying away from explaining her unique perspective. Then a reporter from a major magazine asked, "Ms. Cortez, there's been some controversy about authorship of this discovery. Some suggest that Professor Montgomery and his team did the real mathematical work, while you provided only an initial intuition. How do you respond to that?" A murmur ran through the room. Maria hadn't heard these criticisms before, though the question didn't entirely surprise her. She glanced at Montgomery, whose expression had darkened considerably. Before he could intervene, Maria leaned toward the microphone. "Mathematics is a collaborative field," she said evenly. "I brought a new perspective, and skilled mathematicians helped translate that perspective into formal proof. Both contributions were essential. If you are asking whether I understand every technical aspect of the final paper, no, I do not. Just as Professor Montgomery might not understand every nuance of basket weaving." This drew a genuine laugh from the audience, diffusing the tension. Montgomery nodded appreciatively at her diplomatic response. After the press conference concluded, Maria found herself surrounded by journalists seeking additional comments. One young reporter from a Spanish-language newspaper spoke to her in rapid Dominican Spanish, asking how it felt to represent their community in such a prestigious achievement. Maria answered warmly, appreciating the chance to express herself in her native tongue. As the crowd finally thinned, Dean Harrington of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences approached with a silver-haired man in an immaculate suit. "Ms. Cortez, I'd like to introduce Maxwell Reynolds, CEO of Quantum Analytics. His company specializes in pattern recognition algorithms for financial markets, and he's expressed interest in your visualization method." Reynolds extended a manicured hand. "Remarkable presentation, Ms. Cortez. Your approach has extraordinary commercial potential." Maria shook his hand tentatively. "Thank you, but the method is still developing." "That's precisely why timing is critical," Reynolds continued smoothly. "My company would like to discuss exclusive licensing rights for financial applications. We're prepared to make a very generous offer." Before Maria could respond, Montgomery appeared at her side. "Mr. Reynolds, I believe any discussions about commercialization are premature. The university has policies regarding intellectual property developed under its auspices." Reynolds smiled thinly. "Of course, Professor. I'm merely opening a dialogue. He handed Maria a business card. Think about it, Ms. Cortez. Your insight could revolutionize predictive analytics and provide very significant financial rewards. As Reynolds walked away, Maria turned to Montgomery. I don't understand. What does he want to do with my method? Montgomery sighed. He wants to monetize it, specifically for financial trading algorithms, and he won't be the last. Your approach has applications far beyond pure mathematics. For the next week, Maria's world became increasingly complex. The university's technology transfer office arranged meetings to discuss patenting aspects of her visualization method. Academic publishers requested articles. The mathematics department debated how to formally incorporate her approach into their research programs. Meanwhile, more business interests emerged. 3 major tech companies sent representatives to discuss potential applications in artificial intelligence. A pharmaceutical research firm inquired about using her pattern recognition approach for protein folding simulations. Even the Defense Department expressed interest, though in carefully vague terms. Maria felt increasingly overwhelmed. She had never sought fame or fortune. She had simply seen a pattern and shared what she saw. Now her insight was being parceled into intellectual property, potential profit centers, and strategic applications. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of meetings, Maria sat alone in her university office, staring at the whiteboard, covered with to-do lists and scheduled appointments. Her desk was piled with contracts and non-disclosure agreements awaiting her signature. Her email inbox contained over 200 unread messages. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Vivian Chen, the computer science student who had helped develop the visualization software. You look like you need this, Vivian said, offering a cup of tea. Green tea with honey, my grandmother's cure for a troubled mind. Maria accepted, gratefully. Is it that obvious? Vivian smiled, perching on the edge of the desk. You've had the same expression all week, like someone caught in a riptide. That's exactly how it feels, Maria admitted. Everything is moving so fast. Everyone wants something from me now. That's what happens when you change the world, Vivian observed. The world notices. Maria sipped her tea, the warmth bringing momentary comfort. I didn't set out to change anything. I just saw a pattern that made sense to me. But that's the point, isn't it? You saw something no one else could see. Vivian gestured to the software running on Maria's computer. This program we've built, it's already helping students understand concepts they've struggled with for years. It's helping researchers visualize relationships they couldn't grasp before. Maria nodded slowly. That part makes me happy, but now there are all these companies wanting to own it, control it. Professor Montgomery says we need to protect the intellectual property. What do you want? Vivian asked simply. The question caught Maria off guard. No one had asked her that directly in weeks. They had asked what she thought of various proposals, what she could contribute to different projects, what she needed to fulfill various obligations, but not what she wanted. I want, Maria began, then paused, organizing her thoughts. I want people to use what I've discovered. Not just elite mathematicians or wealthy corporations, but students, teachers, anyone who thinks differently and needs another way to see patterns. Vivian nodded encouragingly. And I want to keep exploring, Maria continued, her voice growing stronger. There are so many patterns I haven't had time to investigate because I'm too busy with meetings and interviews. Then that's what you should tell them, Vivian said. All of them. The next morning, Maria requested a meeting with Montgomery and Dean Harrington. They gathered in the dean's oak-paneled office, where Maria laid out her concerns. I understand the university needs to protect this discovery, she said, but I'm worried about too many restrictions. The visualization method should be available for educational use without barriers. Montgomery frowned slightly. Maria, there's significant commercial value here. The university has invested resources. I know, she interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. And I'm not saying there shouldn't be patents or licenses for commercial applications. But the core educational tool should be accessible, especially for schools with limited resources. Dean Harrington studied her thoughtfully. You're proposing a dual approach? Commercial licensing for corporate applications, but open access for educational uses. Yes, Maria said firmly, and I want time to continue developing the method without pressure to focus only on profitable applications. Montgomery leaned back in his chair. It's unconventional, but not unprecedented. Harvard prides itself on being at the forefront of educational innovation, Harrington noted. There could be significant reputational benefits to an open approach. The meeting concluded with tentative agreement to Maria's proposal. The university would develop a two-track strategy: patent protection for commercial applications with a strong licensing program, alongside an open educational platform that would make the basic visualization tools freely available to schools and individual learners. Maria left feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She had found her voice in this new world, a way to navigate between opportunity and principle. That afternoon, she received an unexpected visitor. Dr. Eleanor Finch, a legendary mathematician in her 80s, had come specifically to meet the woman behind the Rothwell solution. Tiny and bird-like, with penetrating blue eyes and a shock of white hair, Dr. Finch had been one of the first female mathematicians to achieve tenure at MIT in the 1960s. "Walk with me," Dr. Finch commanded, rather than asked, already heading toward the door. They strolled across the campus in the autumn sunshine, Dr. Finch leaning lightly on a carved wooden cane. "They're trying to put you in a box," the older woman observed without preamble. "Academia, industry, publishers, they all want to classify you, package you, own your insight." Maria blinked, startled by the directness. "Yes, that's how it feels, sometimes." "It happened to me too, though in a different way," Dr. Finch continued. "When I published my work on topological invariance in 1965, the establishment couldn't decide whether to dismiss me as a mathematical curiosity, the rare female with computational ability, or claim my work as an extension of male-dominated paradigms." She chuckled dryly. Either way, they needed to contain the threat of genuine originality. They paused by a maple tree, blazing with autumn color. "Your approach threatens people, Ms. Cortez, not just because it works, but because it suggests that all our formal training might sometimes be an obstacle rather than an advantage." Maria considered this. "I never meant to threaten anyone." "Of course not, but originality is always threatening to established systems." Dr. Finch fixed her with a penetrating gaze. "You must decide now what matters to you. Once they've labeled and categorized your work, it will be much harder to maintain its integrity." "What would you suggest?" Maria asked. Dr. Finch smiled. "Insist on teaching, not just consulting or advising, but actual classroom teaching. Share your approach directly with young minds before they've been fully indoctrinated into conventional methods. And keep exploring. Follow your intuition wherever it leads, even if others don't immediately see the value." The conversation stayed with Maria for days afterward. Dr. Finch had articulated something she had been feeling but couldn't express: the subtle pressure to conform, to translate her intuitive approach into terms the academic establishment could comfortably digest and control. The following week, Maria made two significant decisions. First, she declined an invitation to join a prestigious think tank that would have required relocating to California. The salary was extraordinary, but it would have separated her from her family and community. Second, she proposed teaching an Experimental course for the spring semester. Alternative approaches to mathematical visualization. Open to undergraduates from all disciplines, not just mathematics majors. To her surprise, the department approved the proposal almost immediately, perhaps influenced by the positive publicity her work had generated. These decisions didn't resolve all the tensions surrounding her position at Harvard. Some faculty members continued to view her with skepticism, questioning whether her visualization approach would yield further breakthroughs or was merely a one-time insight. Others worried that her lack of formal training would make her an ineffective instructor, regardless of her intuitive gifts. Meanwhile, the business interests continued to circle. Maxwell Reynolds persisted in his efforts to secure exclusive rights to financial applications of her method. A major textbook publisher offered a substantial advance for a book explaining her approach. A software company proposed creating a commercial version of the visualization tools, with Maria as the public face of the product. The pressure to monetize. Her insight was constant and sometimes overwhelming. Maria found unexpected allies, however. Montgomery remained a steadfast advocate, using his academic stature to shield her from the most aggressive commercial overtures. Vivian Chen continued refining the open-source version of the visualization software, ensuring it remained accessible to educators. Most surprisingly, Professor Webster, initially one of Maria's most vocal skeptics, became an important supporter. After using Maria's visualization method to help several struggling students grasp complex calculus concepts, Webster became convinced of its pedagogical value. "We've been teaching mathematics the same way for centuries," Webster admitted during a department meeting. "Perhaps it's time we considered alternative approaches for students who think differently." This endorsement from a respected traditional mathematician helped quiet some of the persistent criticism. Still, Maria often felt caught between worlds, neither fully accepted in academia nor willing to surrender her vision to commercial interests. One Friday afternoon, Maria received a message that the president of the university wished to see her. She arrived at the administration building apprehensive, uncertain what such a high-level meeting might entail. President Lawrence welcomed her warmly into an office adorned with historical university artifacts and photographs of the president with world leaders and renowned scholars. "Ms. Cortez, thank you for coming. I've been following your work with great interest." Maria sat stiffly in an antique chair that had probably held Nobel laureates and heads of state. "Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the university." President Lawrence smiled. "Actually, that's precisely what I wanted to discuss. Your contribution has been extraordinary, not just solving the Rothwell conjecture, but introducing a methodology that challenges conventional mathematical thinking." She nodded, waiting for him to continue. "The university has been approached by the Wayland Foundation. They're interested in establishing an interdisciplinary center focused on alternative cognitive approaches to problem solving across various fields. They've specifically mentioned your work as an inspiration." Maria's eyes widened. "A research center? More than that. An educational initiative that would develop new teaching methodologies based on visual and intuitive approaches to traditionally abstract subjects. Mathematics would be the starting point, but the center would eventually encompass physics, computer science, even economics." President Lawrence leaned forward. "They're offering substantial funding, enough to support research, curriculum development, and scholarships for students from non-traditional backgrounds, and they want you to lead it." Maria felt her chest tighten. "Me? But I don't have the qualifications to direct an academic center. Do you have something more valuable? A proven ability to see problems differently and communicate that vision to others." The president handed her a folder. "The proposal includes provisions for co-directors with traditional academic credentials to handle administrative requirements. Your role would be visionary and pedagogical. Maria opened the folder, scanning the detailed proposal. The Wayland Foundation was offering a 5-year grant totaling millions of dollars, with a focus on developing educational resources for underserved communities and students with learning differences. This could help so many students who think, like me, she said softly. Exactly, President Lawrence agreed. Harvard has an opportunity to lead a transformation in how we teach complex subjects. But we need your perspective to do it authentically. The proposal represented everything Maria had hoped for, the chance to develop her approach without commercial constraints, to help students who struggled with traditional methods, to create resources that would be widely accessible. Yet the scale of responsibility was daunting. I need time to consider this, she said finally. Of course, this would be a significant life change. President Lawrence rose, indicating the meeting was concluding. Whatever you decide, Ms. Cortez, you've already made a remarkable impact on this institution. We're fortunate that Professor Montgomery forgot his papers in your husband's taxi. That evening, Maria sat with Hector and Sophia at their kitchen table, the Wayland proposal spread before them. She'd explained everything, the center, the funding, the responsibility, the prestige. It's an amazing opportunity, Mom, Sophia said, eyes shining. You'd be changing how people learn mathematics. Hector nodded agreement. You've always said the world needs different ways of understanding. Now you can help make that happen. Maria sighed. But I'm not a professor. I don't have degrees or publications. What if I fail? You solved a problem that Harvard's best minds couldn't crack, Hector reminded her. You've already proven yourself. And you'll have help, Sophia added. It says right here they'll appoint co-directors with academic experience. Maria gazed at her family, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for their unwavering support. 3 months ago, they had been focused on paying bills and Sophia's college applications. Now they were discussing a multi-million-dollar research center. There's something else, she said hesitantly. If I accept this position, we could afford to move closer to campus, somewhere nicer than this apartment. Hector and Sophia exchanged glances. This is our home, Hector said simply. We don't need to live somewhere fancy to be happy. Sophia nodded agreement. Besides, this is where you solved the Rothwell problem. It's part of the story now. Maria laughed, tension finally breaking. You're right. Some patterns shouldn't change. Later that night, after Hector and Sophia had gone to bed, Maria sat by the window with a cup of tea, contemplating the decision before her. The city lights twinkled in patterns that now seemed familiar, flowing, recursive, dimensional transitions that mirrored the mathematical structures she visualized. The Wayland Center represented institutionalization of her approach, a process that would inevitably involve compromises and constraints, yet it also offered protection and legitimacy, resources to develop ideas that might otherwise remain unexplored. Dr. Finch had warned about being put in a box, about losing the freedom that had allowed her original insight to flourish. But perhaps the right kind of structure could amplify her vision rather than confine it. Maria pulled out her notebook and began sketching, not equations or spiral patterns this time, but a different kind of structure, a framework that could contain without constraining, that could organize without limiting, that could protect the essential fluidity of her approach, while giving it the substance needed to grow and spread. By morning, she had made her decision. She would accept the directorship, but on her own terms. The center would prioritize educational accessibility over academic prestige. It would actively seek contributions from people with non-traditional backgrounds, and it would maintain its independence from commercial interests. As the sun rose over Boston, Maria felt a sense of peace. Her unexpected journey from taxi driver's wife to mathematical innovator had reached a new turning point. The pattern was expanding, flowing into new dimensions, but maintaining its essential integrity, just like the mathematical harmonies she had always seen swirling beneath the surface of the world. 5 years after Maria Cortez first gazed at the Rothwell conjecture in her kitchen, the Wayland Center for Alternative Mathematical Cognition occupied a renovated Victorian building at the edge of Harvard's campus. Unlike the imposing stone edifices of traditional academic departments, the center featured bright, open spaces with curved walls and spiraling staircases, physical manifestations of Maria's vision of mathematics as flowing patterns rather than rigid structures. On this particular spring morning, Maria stood in the center's main hall, watching as dozens of visiting educators moved between demonstration stations. Teachers from across the country had come to learn about the visualization methods that had transformed mathematics education over the past several years. The high school in Phoenix reported a 43% improvement in calculus comprehension among students who struggled with traditional approaches. Professor Nathaniel Porter, once the graduate student who had first befriended Maria in the library, explained to a group of attentive visitors. Now, the center's director of educational outreach, Nathan, had become one of Maria's most effective advocates. Maria smiled, remembering how far they had come. The journey hadn't been easy. Establishing the center had required navigating complex university politics, overcoming continued skepticism from traditional mathematicians, and resisting persistent commercial pressure. But the results spoke for themselves. The visualization methodology, now expanded and refined through years of collaborative research, had spread far beyond Harvard. Over 2,000 schools across the country had adopted elements of the approach, particularly for students who struggled with conventional mathematical instruction. Universities had begun incorporating visual and intuitive methods alongside traditional analytical approaches. Even the College Board was piloting alternative SAT math sections that accommodated different cognitive styles. "Maria, there you are," called a familiar voice. Sophia Cortez, now a poised young woman in her senior year at MIT, crossed the room to her mother's side. "Sorry, I'm late. The quantum computing lab ran long." Maria embraced her daughter warmly. "You're just in time for the keynote." Sophia glanced around the crowded hall. "Quite a turnout. Dad's sorry he couldn't make it. He got a special fare to the airport." "He never turns down airport runs," Maria said affectionately. Though the family's financial situation had improved dramatically, Hector still drove his taxi with the same dedication as always. He had reduced his hours to part-time, but insisted on maintaining the connection to the city and its people that had defined his life for so long. Together, mother and daughter made their way to the center's auditorium, where educators, researchers, and students filled the curved seating that surrounded a central stage. Unlike traditional lecture halls with their hierarchical arrangement, the Wayland Center's auditorium was designed for collaborative learning, a space where ideas could flow in multiple directions simultaneously. As Maria took her place on stage, she felt a momentary flash of the same anxiety she had experienced years ago at her first academic presentation. Despite all her accomplishments, the successful center, the educational programs, the subsequent mathematical insights she had contributed, she sometimes still felt like an imposter in the academic world. But as she gazed out at the audience, she recognized so many faces, teachers who had embraced her methods, students whose academic lives had been transformed, colleagues who had become friends. This was no longer just Harvard's world that she had entered. It was a community she had helped create. "Good morning," she began, her accent still present, but her delivery confident. Today, we celebrate 5 years of the Wayland Center, but more importantly, we celebrate a shift in how we think about thinking itself. Maria had become an accomplished speaker, learning to weave personal narrative with substantive insights in a way that resonated with diverse audiences. Today, she spoke not about the Rothwell conjecture or her spiral notation, but about the broader implications of embracing cognitive diversity in education and research. Traditional mathematics education assumes a particular kind of mind, she explained. It rewards those who think sequentially, abstractly, symbolically, but human cognition is vastly more diverse. Some minds perceive patterns spatially, relationally, or dynamically. These minds aren't deficient, they're different, and they have their own unique strengths. As she spoke, large displays around the auditorium showed examples of student work, conventional equations alongside visual models, symbolic proofs beside spatial representations. Each approach revealed different aspects of the same mathematical truths. 5 years ago, we set out to create tools for students who think differently. What we discovered along the way was more profound, that by embracing multiple cognitive approaches, we all gain deeper understanding. The visual thinker and the symbolic reasoner need each other to see the complete picture. After her keynote, Maria mingled with the visitors, answering questions and listening to stories of classroom implementation. A high school teacher from rural Kentucky described how a student with dyslexia who had always struggled with mathematical notation had blossomed using the visual approach. A professor from Stanford shared research suggesting that even highly abstract mathematical thinking could benefit from periodic shifts to spatial reasoning modes. As the morning sessions concluded, Maria slipped away to her office. A circular room with windows facing the garden and walls covered with a combination of equations, artistic representations of mathematical concepts, and children's thank you letters. She had just settled at her desk when a knock came at the door. "Dr. Reynolds is here to see you," her assistant announced. Maria nodded, composing herself. Maxwell Reynolds, once the aggressive CEO pursuing exclusive rights to her methodology, had undergone his own transformation over the years. After a sudden health crisis had forced him to step back from quantum analytics, he had re-evaluated his priorities and emerged as an unlikely ally of the Wayland Center. "Maria, congratulations on a wonderful anniversary celebration," Reynolds said, entering with a slight limp, a remnant of the stroke that had changed his path. "The center has exceeded even your ambitious vision." "Thank you, Max. I'm glad you could be here today." Maria gestured to a chair near her desk. "How was your trip?" "Productive. The Singapore Education Ministry is very interested in your approach, particularly for students who struggle with traditional instruction." Reynolds now headed an educational foundation focused on bringing alternative learning methodologies to international markets, not for profit, but for impact. Their conversation turned to potential collaborations in Asian educational systems, where rigid traditional approaches were being questioned in the face of changing workforce needs. Reynolds had become an unexpected bridge between Maria's educational vision and international implementation. As they discussed strategies for adapting the visual methodology to different cultural contexts, Maria reflected on the irony of their partnership. The man who had once represented everything she feared about commercialization had become an important advocate for accessible education. People, like mathematical problems, sometimes revealed unexpected patterns when viewed from different angles. After Reynolds departed, Maria had just enough time to review her notes before her next appointment, a monthly video conference with the directors of satellite centers that had been established in Chicago, Houston, and Oakland. These centers focused on bringing the visualization methodology to underserved communities, represented the fulfillment of Maria's original vision. making mathematical understanding accessible to those traditionally excluded. The meeting ran long, filled with updates on community programs, teacher training initiatives, and new research findings. By the time it concluded, afternoon was fading into evening, and Maria realized she had missed lunch entirely. As she gathered her things to leave, her phone buzzed with a message from Sophia. Emergency meeting with thesis advisor. Can't make dinner? So sorry. Maria smiled ruefully. Sophia's brilliant academic career kept her perpetually overscheduled. As a double major in mathematics and computer science, she was developing programming languages specifically designed for visual spatial thinkers, extending her mother's insights into new technological realms. Rather than heading home to an empty apartment, Hector was working late, Maria decided to walk through the center's garden, a space specifically designed to embody mathematical principles in living form. Fibonacci spirals in plant placements, fractal patterns in the landscaping, golden ratios in the layout, all created an environment where mathematical concepts could be experienced physically. She sat on a bench beneath a flowering dogwood, enjoying the evening quiet, when she noticed an older woman sketching on a pad near the fountain. Looking closer, Maria recognized Dr. Eleanor Finch, now in her late 80s but still sharp-minded and regular visitor to the center. "May I join you?" Maria asked, approaching the legendary mathematician. Dr. Finch looked up with a smile. "Maria, perfect timing. I've been thinking about your hyperbolic visualization model and had an insight about extending it to quantum probability spaces." Maria sat beside her, intrigued. Though formally retired, Dr. Finch remained intellectually vibrant, often serving as a bridge between traditional mathematical approaches and Maria's innovative methods. Their friendship had deepened over the years, with Finch becoming both mentor and collaborator. "Show me," Maria said, leaning toward the sketchpad. For the next hour, they worked together in the fading light, developing a new visualization approach that combined elements of Maria's spiral notation with traditional quantum mechanical formulations. Their working style exemplified the collaborative ethos of the center, Finch contributing deep theoretical knowledge, Maria adding intuitive pattern recognition, each strengthening the other's perspective. As darkness fell, they finally gathered their notes and walked slowly toward the center's main entrance. The building glowed warmly against the twilight sky, light spilling from windows where several graduate students could be seen working late, their animated gestures visible even from a distance. "You've created something remarkable here," Dr. Finch observed, gazing at the building. "Not just the methodology or the programs, but a genuinely new way of being in mathematics." Maria considered this. "It wasn't what I set out to do. I just wanted to share how I saw patterns." "The most profound transformations rarely begin with grand ambitions," Finch replied. "They start with simple truths, honestly expressed." She patted Maria's hand affectionately. "What pleases me most is that you've maintained the integrity of your vision while allowing it to evolve. You didn't let them put you in a box, after all." After saying goodnight to Dr. Finch, Maria found herself reluctant to leave. Instead of heading home, she wandered through the quiet building, passing laboratories where researchers developed new visualization tools, classrooms arranged in spiral configurations, and community spaces where local students received free tutoring. In one seminar room, a whiteboard still displayed equations from an afternoon session. Maria paused, studying the notation, a seamless blend of traditional mathematical symbols and elements of her visualization method. This synthesis represented exactly what she had hoped for. Not rejection of established approaches, but expansion to include multiple ways of understanding. She continued upward, climbing the spiraling staircase to the center's small observatory. The domed ceiling could be retracted on clear nights, revealing the star-filled sky above Cambridge. Maria opened the dome and sat in silence, gazing upward at the cosmic patterns overhead. So much had changed in 5 years. The taxi driver's wife, who had once feared speaking in faculty meetings, now advised national education policy committees. The woman who had struggled to understand academic jargon now co-authored papers in prestigious mathematical journals. The mother who had worried about affording her daughter's college applications now oversaw a multi-million-dollar research center. Yet in essential ways, she remained the same Maria who had sat at her kitchen table that fateful night, seeing patterns, flow where others saw only static equations. Her core insight that mathematical relationships could be understood through shape and movement rather than just symbolic representation had not changed. It had simply found its proper form and context. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her. Reflections, a text from Hector. "Just finished my shift. Want me to pick you up?" Maria smiled. Some patterns remained beautifully constant. She texted back, "Yes, please, I'm at the center." 20 minutes later, Hector's familiar taxi pulled up outside the building. Maria climbed in, settling into the passenger seat that still felt like home after all these years. "Good day," Hector asked, pulling away from the curb. "Wonderful," Maria replied. "The anniversary symposium went perfectly." Hector beamed with pride. "I told 3 customers today that my wife revolutionized mathematics education. The woman from the airport didn't believe me until I showed her your picture on the center's website." Maria laughed. "Still my biggest promoter." "Always," he said, reaching for her hand. They drove through Cambridge's evening streets, passing Harvard Yard, where it had all begun. Maria gazed out at the historic buildings, remembering her first tentative visits to the mathematics library, her nervousness at early faculty meetings, the mixture of skepticism and curiosity that had greeted her initial insights. "I had an interesting fare this afternoon," Hector said, interrupting her thoughts. "A high school student from Dorchester, very bright but struggling in school. She was visiting Harvard for a special program at your center." "The Pathway program?" Maria asked, referring to an initiative specifically designed for promising students from underserved communities. "Yes, that's it. She was so excited, talking about how for the first time math made sense to her. She had all these sketches showing patterns in ways I didn't understand, reminded me of your notebooks." Maria felt a surge of emotion. This was what mattered most, not the academic recognition or the prestigious center, but reaching students who thought differently, who saw patterns where others saw problems. "Did you tell her about me?" Maria asked. Hector shook his head. "I wanted to, but sometimes it's better to let people discover their own path. I just told her to keep trusting how she sees the world." Maria squeezed his hand, grateful once again for his quiet wisdom. Perfect advice. As they neared their apartment building, Maria noticed something she hadn't before. The route home traced a pattern remarkably similar to the spiral notation she had developed for the Rothwell conjecture. The city streets, the river crossing, the final approach to their neighborhood, all followed a natural flow that minimized resistance while maintaining direction. Hector had been driving this route for years, optimizing it through intuition and experience rather than formal analysis. It was another reminder that patterns existed everywhere, recognized through many different kinds of intelligence. At home, Maria found a note from Sophia explaining she would be working late at the MIT lab, but would see them for Sunday dinner. The apartment was quiet, but comfortably so, a peaceful contrast to the intellectual intensity of the center. Despite their improved financial situation, the Cortez family had chosen to remain in their modest Dorchester apartment, though they had renovated it thoughtfully over time. The kitchen where Maria had first examined the Rothwell problem now featured better lighting and new appliances, but remained essentially the same space where mathematical history had unexpectedly unfolded. Maria made tea and settled at the kitchen table with her notebook. Despite all the sophisticated technology available at the center, she still preferred to begin new projects with pencil and paper, allowing her thoughts to flow directly through her hands without digital mediation. Tonight, she was exploring a new avenue, applying her visualization methodology to linguistics, specifically language acquisition in multilingual children. Preliminary research suggested that children who struggled with traditional grammar rules sometimes excelled when language patterns were presented visually or spatially. As she worked, Maria reflected on how her approach had expanded beyond mathematics. The fundamental insight that patterns could be recognized through multiple cognitive pathways had proven relevant to fields ranging from computer programming to music theory, from architectural design to economic modeling. What had begun as a specific solution to a specific mathematical problem had evolved into a broader philosophy of knowledge, an approach that valued diverse ways of perceiving, processing, and expressing understanding. This expansion beyond the original domain was perhaps the most significant legacy of Maria's work. The clock showed nearly midnight when Maria finally set aside her notebook. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more demonstrations, more opportunities to share and refine her methods. But for now, in the quiet of her kitchen, she allowed herself a moment to appreciate the journey. From the struggling immigrant balancing checkbooks for local businesses to the internationally recognized innovator transforming educational approaches, the path had not been linear, but spiral, curving back on itself in places, expanding outward. In others, maintaining its essential pattern while growing in unexpected directions. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright. Maria woke early, made coffee, and prepared to meet with a group of education reporters who had requested interviews following the anniversary symposium. Media interest in the Wayland Center remained high, particularly as standardized test data increasingly validated the effectiveness of the alternative approach. She dressed carefully in a blue suit, more formal than her usual attire, but appropriate for the interviews. As she fastened a silver pendant necklace, a gift from the center's staff on the 3rd anniversary of its founding, Hector appeared in the doorway. "There's someone here to see you," he said, his expression unreadable. "Now, it's barely 7. Hector nodded. "He says it's important." "Professor Montgomery." Maria froze. Richard Montgomery, the mathematician whose forgotten paper had started everything, had left Harvard 4 years ago for a prestigious position at CERN in Switzerland. They had corresponded occasionally, but hadn't spoken directly in years. She found Montgomery in their living room, looking older but still possessing the same intense energy she remembered. He rose when she entered, extending his hand. "Maria, forgive the early intrusion. I arrived from Geneva last night and wanted to see you before your schedule filled." "Richard, what a surprise. Please, sit." Maria gestured to the couch. "Coffee?" "Thank you, no, I won't stay long." Montgomery seemed unusually formal, almost nervous. "I came because I wanted to tell you something in person." Maria waited, curious. "The Nobel Committee for Physics has been reviewing applications of the Rothwell solution to quantum field stability. Specifically, how your approach resolved contradictions in the standard model that had blocked progress for decades." Maria nodded cautiously. The physics applications had been developed by others, building on her original insight but extending it far beyond her direct contribution. "The work has led to significant breakthroughs in quantum computing architecture," Montgomery continued. "The committee has decided to recognize these advances with this year's prize." "That's wonderful," Maria said. "Your continued work on the implications deserves recognition." Montgomery shook his head. "Not my work, Maria. The prize is being awarded jointly to Dr. James Whitman for the quantum applications and to you for the foundational mathematical approach that made it possible." Maria stared at him, uncomprehending. That's not possible. The Nobel Prize in Physics? I'm not a physicist. I don't even have a degree. The committee doesn't award prizes for credentials. They award them for contributions that fundamentally advance human knowledge. Montgomery's face softened into a smile. They'll make the official announcement next week, but I wanted you to hear it from a friend first. Maria sank into a chair, overwhelmed. The Nobel Prize represented something she had never aspired to, never even considered within the realm of possibility. Her work had always been focused on understanding and education, not accolades. I don't know what to say, she finally managed. You don't need to say anything now, Montgomery replied. Just be prepared for a new level of attention. This will change things. After Montgomery left, Maria sat motionless, trying to process this unexpected development. Hector approached cautiously, sensing her turmoil. What did he want? He asked. Maria looked up, still dazed. He says I'm receiving the Nobel Prize in Physics for the Rothwell solution. Hector's eyes widened, then crinkled with joy. My wife, the Nobel laureate. He pulled her into an embrace. I always knew you would change the world. Maria leaned into his familiar warmth, grateful for his unwavering faith. It doesn't feel real. I'm not a scientist. I'm just someone who sees patterns differently. Sometimes that's enough, Hector said simply, seeing what others miss. Throughout the day, as Maria conducted her scheduled interviews with education reporters, she kept Montgomery's news to herself. The official announcement would come soon enough, bringing a tsunami of attention that would likely dwarf even the initial publicity surrounding the Rothwell solution. For now, she wanted to focus on the work itself, the educational programs, the research initiatives, the students whose lives were being transformed. These tangible impacts meant more to her than any prize, no matter how prestigious. That evening, Sophia joined her parents for an impromptu celebration dinner. Though sworn to secrecy until the official announcement, they couldn't resist marking the moment privately as a family. I can't believe my mum's getting a Nobel Prize, Sophia said, her eyes shining. Do you know what this means for girls everywhere, especially Latina girls with big dreams? Maria hadn't considered this aspect. How her recognition might inspire others who saw themselves reflected in her story. The taxi driver's wife from the Dominican Republic, with no formal training but an extraordinary gift for pattern recognition, now joining the ranks of history's most celebrated scientists. It's not about me, she said. It's about recognizing that insight can come from unexpected sources, that different ways of thinking have value. Sophia reached across the table, taking her mother's hand. It's about both. The work matters, but so does the person who did it. Your story matters. Mom! As they clinked glasses in a quiet toast, Maria reflected on the patterns that had brought her to this moment, the seemingly random events that, viewed from a different perspective, revealed an underlying coherence. The rainstorm that brought Professor Montgomery to Hector's taxi, the forgotten paper that found its way to her kitchen table, the spiral notation that emerged from her unique way of seeing. Each event on its own might seem insignificant, even accidental, but together they formed a pattern as elegant and inevitable as the mathematical structures she had illuminated. Not a straight line from problem to solution, but a spiraling path that honored the true shape of discovery. Later that night, Maria stood by the window of their apartment, gazing out at the city lights once more. Boston had been her home for nearly 30 years, the backdrop for a life that had unfolded in ways she could never have imagined when she arrived as a hopeful 19-year-old immigrant. Soon those lights would be joined by the bright spotlight of international recognition. The Nobel Prize would bring attention far beyond academic and educational circles. There would be new pressures, new expectations, new opportunities to navigate, but Maria felt surprisingly calm. The pattern recognition that had guided her through mathematical complexities would serve her equally well through whatever came next. She would continue to follow the natural flow of ideas, seeking the paths of least resistance while maintaining direction and purpose. The taxi driver's wife, who had stumbled upon a Harvard problem and seen what generations of geniuses had missed, would soon stand in Stockholm, receiving recognition from the King of Sweden. It was an improbable trajectory by any measure, yet from a different perspective, viewed as a flowing pattern rather than a linear progression, it made perfect sense. The spiral had simply continued its natural expansion, maintaining its essential character while growing into new dimensions. Maria smiled, turning from the window. The true beauty of mathematics, and of life itself, lay not in rigid formulations, but in recognizing the elegant patterns that connected seemingly disparate elements into a coherent whole. That had been her gift all along, not just solving a specific problem, but offering a new way of seeing the patterns that governed everything. The taxi driver's wife had not just cracked Harvard's unsolvable problem. She had revealed a new path to understanding itself, one that would continue unfolding in spiraling patterns long after her name became enshrined in scientific history. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.